She had 40 seconds to save a child's life, and using that phone would end her own. Beatrice Vale pressed her back against the cold stone wall outside the cellar door, listening to the silence beneath it. Not the comfortable silence of sleep, the wrong kind. The kind that meant a 6-year-old girl had stopped fighting to breathe. The phone in her hand belonged to Adrian Rossi, the most dangerous man in Chicago, and his standing order was carved into the memory of every person inside this mansion. Touch this line without permission, and you disappear. Beatrice had spent 3 years making herself invisible inside these walls. Now she was about to do the one thing that guaranteed someone would finally see her. If this story moves you, if you've ever been the person nobody looked at twice, drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every word of this matters. The Rossi estate sat at the end of Caldwell Drive like something that had decided, a long time ago, that it didn't need to apologize for existing. 4 stories of pale limestone and iron-framed windows, surrounded by grounds so perfectly maintained they looked artificial, hedges cut to geometric angles, gravel paths raked every morning before dawn, a fountain in the center courtyard that ran year-round even in February when the temperature dropped into single digits and the mist coming off the water turned to frost in the air. It was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. You could admire it, but you kept your distance. Beatrice Vale had learned the distances on her first day. She was 25 then, hired through a placement agency that specialized in domestic staff for high-net-worth households, which was a careful way of saying households where the source of the wealth was something you didn't ask about directly. The agency contact had given her one piece of advice before sending her to the interview. Keep your eyes down, do your job, and don't form opinions. Beatrice had nodded like she understood, taken the position, and spent the next 3 years learning that the real rule was simpler than that. Don't be seen at all. She was good at it. Had been good at it long before the Rossi estate, truth be told. At 5'4" and 182 pounds, Beatrice occupied a body that the world had decided early on to look past rather than at. Not ugly, she wasn't that, she knew that, but soft in a way that drew no particular attention. With brown hair she kept pulled back tight and eyes the color of river water, dark and unremarkable in any light. She wore her uniform, gray dress, white apron, flat rubber-soled shoes, like a second skin. She had learned to move through rooms without displacing air. She could refill a water glass at a dinner table with 12 people seated around it, and not a single one would register that she had been there. That invisibility had kept her employed for 3 years inside the most dangerous household in Chicago. The Rossi organization ran across 4 states with tentacles in shipping, construction, private security, and several other industries that didn't survive close examination. Adrian Rossi was its head, had been since he was 31, when his father's heart gave out during what the official report called a fishing trip in Lake Michigan, and what everyone in the city understood to mean something else entirely. He was 38 now, and he had spent 7 years building what his father started into something considerably more terrifying. He had a face that belonged on a magazine cover, and eyes that belonged on a predator. Gray-green, sharp as cut glass, and completely unreadable. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke in a quiet, flat register that made every word feel like the last warning before something permanent happened. The staff feared him uniformly and completely. Beatrice feared him too. She was honest about that with herself, at least, but she had also spent 3 years watching him move through his own household, and what she had noticed, what she had filed away in the careful mental catalog she kept of everything she observed, was that his fear was not the most important thing about him. The most important thing about Adrian Rossi was his daughter. Lily was 6 years old and had been born during the 2-year period when her mother, Elaine Rossi Carver, was still alive, and the household had felt like something approaching a real family. Beatrice hadn't been there for that period. She'd arrived 8 months after Elaine's death, a car accident on the expressway in November, black ice and a concrete barrier, the kind of death that didn't have a story behind it, just physics and bad luck. And by then Lily had already retreated somewhere deep inside herself. The grief counselor who came twice a week used words like selective mutism and prolonged acute stress response, which were clinical ways of saying that a 5-year-old had lost her mother and the loss had taken something from her that no one knew how to give back. Lily didn't speak. Not completely. She had words, used them in small, careful doses, but mostly she communicated through drawings. She went through sketchbooks the way other children went through picture books, filling page after page with dense, layered images that Beatrice had learned to read like a language. Animals appeared frequently, dogs and horses, and once, in a drawing that Beatrice had quietly kept, a small figure in a gray dress standing between a child and a large dark shape that might have been a storm cloud or might have been something else entirely. That drawing had been done 6 months into Beatrice's employment. She had never shown it to anyone. Her relationship with Lily had not been planned or strategic. It had happened the way most true things happen, slowly and sideways, without announcement. Beatrice had been cleaning the upstairs library one October afternoon when she'd found Lily sitting in the window seat with a sketchbook open in her lap. And instead of quietly withdrawing the way the protocols dictated she should, Beatrice had stopped and looked at what the girl was drawing. A horse. Detailed and careful and slightly melancholy, the way children's drawings of things they love tend to be. Beatrice had sat down on the edge of the window seat, a presumption that still made her chest tighten when she thought about it, and said, "The legs are really good. The hard part is the legs." Lily had looked at her for a long moment. Then she'd turned the sketchbook slightly so Beatrice could see it better. That was all. That was how it started, with a drawing of a horse and 2 sentences and a small, cautious offering of shared space. Over the following weeks, it had become something more substantial. Afternoon check-ins that weren't formally scheduled, a routine that lived in the gaps between Beatrice's duties, quiet companionship that asked nothing of Lily except that she be exactly as she was. Beatrice had learned which drawings Lily was proud of and which ones frustrated her. She'd learned that Lily didn't like the texture of wool blankets, but would accept the weight of them if they were wrapped around a stuffed bear first. She'd learned that the nightmares came on Tuesdays and Thursdays for reasons no one had been able to determine. She'd learned, slowly and carefully and without ever saying it out loud, that this child had become the reason she got out of bed each morning in the small staff room on the 3rd floor and put on the gray dress and the white apron and made herself invisible again. The other staff noticed but said nothing. In a household like the Rossi estate, you didn't comment on arrangements that seemed to be working. Lily was calmer. The grief counselor had noted a modest but real improvement. Adrian Rossi, when he observed his daughter sitting quietly with the maid while the maid folded laundry and Lily drew, had said nothing. His silence on the matter was the closest thing to permission that existed in his household. It was, by the standards of her life inside those walls, a kind of stability. It ended the day Serafina Voss arrived. Beatrice was in the front hallway arranging cut flowers, white roses, always white roses. The household order hadn't changed in 2 years, when the car pulled up. She watched through the tall window beside the door as a black sedan came to a stop in the motor court, and then the door opened and Serafina stepped out. And Beatrice understood immediately, with the particular clarity that comes from being someone who watches closely, that everything was about to become more difficult. Serafina Voss was 34 and extraordinary in the way that demands immediate attention and makes a room rearrange itself around the person entering it. Tall, angular, with dark auburn hair that moved like something out of a photograph, and a face so symmetrically arranged it was almost alarming. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Beatrice earned in 4 months, and she moved across the motor court with the loose, unhurried confidence of someone who has never once had to wonder whether a room wanted her in it. Adrian was behind her, one hand at the small of her back, a gesture so intimate that Beatrice had to look away from it, not from any personal feeling but from the reflexive modesty of someone who'd spent years being the person in the room that couples forget is present. The introduction to the staff happened in the main foyer. Brief, efficient, the way Adrian did everything. "This is Serafina. She'll be spending time at the estate. Make sure she has everything she needs." That was it. No title, no further context. But the ring on Serafina's left hand, tasteful, ostentatious, a single oval diamond in a platinum setting, provided all the context necessary. Serafina had looked at the assembled staff with a calm, comprehensive gaze that took inventory without appearing to. When it reached Beatrice, it paused for approximately 1 second. Then it moved on. Later, Beatrice would identify that pause as the moment she should have started being afraid. The first 2 weeks were surface calm. Serafina toured the household, asked questions about the routines, made a few small adjustments to the menus and the flower arrangements. She was polite in the way that costs nothing and offers nothing, cordial, distant, and utterly unreadable. The staff began to relax incrementally, deciding she was not as intimidating as she appeared. Beatrice did not relax. She watched. And what she watched was the way Serafina watched Lily. It wasn't malicious in those early days. Or if it was buried deep enough that you needed the particular skill of habitual observation to detect it. Serafina would enter a room where Lily was drawing and stand at a careful, respectful distance. She would remark on the drawings in a tone that was technically positive, but carried a frequency underneath it, just barely perceptible, like the hum of a wire. She would offer Lily things, sweets, new drawing pencils, a music box she'd brought from what she called my apartment in the city. With a warmth so precisely calibrated, it sat in the exact space between genuine and performance. Lily, who had survived a significant loss and possessed the particular animal sensitivity of children who have learned that the world does not always protect them, did not reach for any of it. She was polite. She said thank you. She took the pencils and put them on a shelf and did not use them. She kept drawing with the ones she already had. Serafina noticed. Beatrice noticed Serafina noticing. The wedge began to form in small increments. A comment to Adrian over dinner, overheard by Beatrice from the hallway. She seems very attached to the maid, said with gentle concern, not accusation, followed by, I wonder if it's healthy for her to form such a strong bond with someone in a service role. Adrian's response, quiet and even. She's been attached to Beatrice for 2 years. It's been good for her. Of course. Pause. I just wonder if it's good for the long term. A child her age should be building relationships with people who'll be in her life permanently. Household staff turnover. Another pause. I only bring it up because I care. Beatrice, standing in the hallway with a stack of clean towels against her chest, had pressed her back against the wall and stood very still. She heard Adrian make a sound that wasn't agreement or disagreement. She took her towels to the linen closet and stood there for a long time in the smell of fabric softener, her hands flat on a shelf, breathing. The comment hadn't damaged her position. Not yet, but it had mapped the terrain. Serafina Voss, she understood now, was a woman who understood that power could be removed from people not through confrontation, but through careful erosion. A word planted here, a concern raised there. Over time, the ground shifts under someone's feet, and when they finally fall, it looks like they simply lost their balance. Beatrice was careful after that, more careful than she'd ever been. She kept her interactions with Lily natural but calibrated, never proprietary, never in Serafina's direct line of sight when it could be avoided. She was the professional, competent, invisible domestic she had always been, and she did not give Serafina anything else to plant. It wasn't enough, of course. It was never going to be enough. Because the problem was not Beatrice. The problem was Lily herself, and the way the child stubbornly, silently, refused to open toward the woman who was going to be her stepmother. Lily would sit through dinners with Serafina and Adrian with the composed, inward stillness of a much older person, answering direct questions in the small allotment of words she was willing to spend, and otherwise retreating entirely into her sketchbook. She didn't tantrum. She didn't protest. She simply withheld. And the withholding, Beatrice understood, was maddening to someone like Serafina in ways that went beyond ordinary impatience, because Serafina needed the child to choose her, not for love. Beatrice had stopped entertaining that possibility sometime in the 3rd week, for something else, something that lived behind the careful warmth and the oval diamond ring and the precisely calibrated concern about healthy attachment. Beatrice didn't know what it was yet. She only knew it was there. Adrian left for Milwaukee on a Thursday. He told the household 2 days in advance. Negotiations for a shipping contract. Legitimate, or at least legitimately presented, that required his physical presence for what he estimated would be 4 days. He'd kissed Lily on the top of her head in the hallway outside the dining room, and Lily had grabbed 2 fistfuls of his jacket and pressed her face against his chest for longer than was typical, and Adrian had stood very still and let her, one hand on the back of her head, his expression doing something complicated that was visible only if you were watching from the hallway. which Beatrice was. He had looked up once, and his eyes had found her in the hallway with the particular directness that she'd never gotten fully accustomed to. "The usual routine while I'm gone," he said. It wasn't addressed to anyone specifically, but it was addressed to her, and both of them knew it. "Yes," she said. He had nodded once and left. Within 6 hours of Adrian's car leaving the motor court, Serafina had sent 3/4 of the household staff home. She'd done it smoothly, efficiently, with the kind of organizational authority that left no obvious opening for objection. Maintenance personnel, the overnight security rotations, 2 of the 3 daytime maids, the groundskeeping crew. Skeleton staff only, the chef, 1 security guard at the front gate, and Beatrice. When the chef asked about reduced coverage protocols, Serafina had said, with a smile so even it was almost geometric, that Mr. Rossi had authorized her to make adjustments during his absence, and that she appreciated everyone's cooperation. Beatrice had not been dismissed. She had understood, immediately, that this was not an oversight. The estate changed in its atmospherics the moment the staff thinned out. It happened fast. Within 24 hours, the particular quality of air inside the limestone walls shifted from cold to something colder, less like marble, more like a freezer waiting to be used. The chef came and went on a reduced schedule. The security guard at the gate was present, but positioned entirely at the perimeter, with no visibility into the household interior. Serafina moved through the empty rooms with an ease that was newly unconstrained, and the mask, the warmth, the careful calibration, began to slip in small, incremental degrees. With Beatrice present, it stayed mostly in place. Mostly. But with Lily, the adjustments began. Small things at first. Serafina coming into the room where Lily was drawing and picking up the sketchbook without asking, and looking through it with an expression of mild, condescending interest, before setting it down and saying, "You draw the same things over and over." Not cruel exactly, but not kind. A kind person would say something specific and genuine. This was something else. The particular comment designed to make a child feel small without giving them anything solid to push back against. Lily had taken the sketchbook from the table and held it against her chest without speaking. "It's a phase," Serafina had said to no one in particular, and left the room. Beatrice, who had been making Lily's bed in the adjacent room with the door open, had stood with a pillowcase in her hands and waited for her own heartbeat to even out. She said nothing. She had no standing to say anything. She was the maid. The second day after Adrian left, Serafina informed Lily at breakfast that she was enrolling her in a social skills group that met twice weekly in the city, effective immediately, and that the twice-weekly visits from the grief counselor would be discontinued because, as Serafina put it with a small, kind smile, "You've been in therapy long enough and it isn't clearly helping." Lily had gone very still in her chair. "Dr. Marsh has been coming for a year," Beatrice said. It came out before she'd finished deciding to say it. She was standing by the sideboard, and she knew, the moment the words were out, that she had crossed something. Serafina turned to look at her with the measured patience of someone who has been waiting for a particular event to occur. "Excuse me?" she said. "I only meant—" Beatrice stopped herself. Reset. Dr. Marsh has a strong rapport with Lily. Mr. Rossi has indicated the appointments are important. "Mr. Rossi has also asked me to make decisions in his absence," Serafina said. The warmth in her voice had not disappeared. It had simply turned into something that used the same facial muscles but came from a different place entirely. "And I'd appreciate it if the staff directed concerns about household decisions to me directly, rather than raising them in front of Lily." The implication being clearly that Beatrice had done the wrong thing by speaking at all. "Of course," Beatrice said. "I apologize." She looked at Lily. Lily was looking at her plate. The grief counselor's scheduled visit 2 days later happened to fall on a day when Serafina informed the gate that the household was not accepting visitors. Dr. Marsh called the estate's main line. Serafina answered and explained there had been a scheduling miscommunication and they would reach out to reschedule. She did not reschedule. Lily stopped coming down for breakfast. Beatrice found her in her room each morning with her sketchbook and her silence. And the silence had changed quality. It was no longer the self-contained quiet of a child at peace with her own company, but something more pressurized, like weather building. The drawings changed too. The horses and dogs were still there, but they appeared now in tighter composition, surrounded by dense cross-hatching that Lily applied with a particular focused pressure that left grooves in the page beneath. On the fourth morning of Adrian's absence, Beatrice brought Lily's breakfast to her room and found two sketchbooks in the trash bin beside the desk. She stood in the doorway with the breakfast tray and looked at Lily, who was sitting at the desk with a new sketchbook, not drawing, just sitting with her hands flat on the blank page. "Lily," Beatrice said quietly. Lily looked at her. "Those books in the bin." "She said they were childish," Lily said. Her voice was small and flat. The kind of flat that comes from pressing something down very hard. Beatrice set the tray on the nightstand. She sat on the edge of the bed, which put her at Lily's eye level. She wanted to say something that would fix it. She sat with the wanting and did nothing with it because there was nothing to do with it. "They weren't childish," she said. Lily looked at the blank page. "She threw them in the bin herself. I took them back out. Then she found them again and put them back in." Beatrice breathed. "She said my father agrees they aren't good and he just doesn't want to hurt my feelings by telling me." A pause. "She said that's why he left. Because it's hard to be around me." For a moment the room was very quiet. "That is not true," Beatrice said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "How do you know?" "Because I've watched your father with you for 2 years, and I know what he looks like when he's around you." A breath. "He doesn't leave because it's hard. He leaves because he has things he has to do, and he always comes back." Lily was quiet for a long time. "She says you're going to leave too," she said. "Eventually." Beatrice looked at the child sitting with her hands on a blank page in a room that had gone somehow narrower and colder in the span of 4 days. "I'm here right now," she said. "Right now is what I can tell you about." It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. But it was what she had. She retrieved the sketchbooks from the trash bin before she left the room, and she put them in the small cabinet in her own room where she kept her personal items, and she did not mention them again. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Beatrice was in the third-floor laundry room sorting through linens when she heard it, a sound that entered the household the way wrong sounds always enter houses, arriving in the gaps between the usual noise and staying too long. She couldn't identify it immediately. She stood with a folded sheet in her hands and listened. Then she heard it again, and her body moved before her mind did. She was down the back stairs and through the kitchen and at the door to the lower level, the area the household staff called the cellar, though it was more properly a climate-controlled storage level beneath the main basement, accessible by a narrow stone staircase, before she had fully assembled a coherent thought. The door to the cellar level was closed. In 3 years of working in this household, Beatrice had been through that door exactly twice, both times to retrieve wine bottles for formal dinners. It was not a part of the estate anyone used regularly. The sound was coming from behind it. She tried the handle. Locked. "Lily?" She said it directly at the door. Not loud, level. A sound from behind the door. Muffled, labored, the kind of breathing that takes work. Beatrice hit the door with her palm. Once, sharp. "Lily, can you hear me?" A sound that might have been yes. "Stay close to the door." She turned. Serafina was standing in the kitchen doorway. The woman was immaculate. That was the thing Beatrice registered first, immaculate and completely calm, with a glass of water in one hand and an expression of measured neutrality that was the most frightening thing Beatrice had ever seen on a human face. "Where is the key?" Beatrice said. "Lily needed a quiet space," Serafina said. "She was having an episode." "She's having an asthma attack. Where is the key?" A pause. Something moved behind Serafina's expression. Not guilt, not quite anything Beatrice had a word for. "She isn't having an attack," Serafina said. "She's dramatic. She does this for attention. I can hear her breathing from here." Beatrice was aware of her voice doing something she hadn't authorized it to do, pulling tight, going flat. "Give me the key." "I'll remind you of your role here," Serafina said. The words came out soft and exact, and they did what they were designed to do. They found the specific fault line in Beatrice's position inside this household and pressed it. Your role. The maid, the invisible woman. The person who had no standing in a dispute between the future mistress of the estate and anyone. Beatrice stood in the kitchen of Adrian Rossi's estate and felt all of it. The 3 years of kept-down eyes and quiet rooms, and making herself small enough to fit through spaces without displacing air. She felt all of it press against her chest from the inside. Behind the door, Lily's breathing changed. It went from labored to something shorter, choppier, the sound of airways tightening. "She doesn't have her inhaler," Beatrice said. "She's fine." "She is not fine." The voice that came out of her was not the voice she used in this household. It was something older than that, something from before she'd learned to disappear. "And if you don't give me that key, I'm going through that door." Serafina set her glass of water down on the counter. "If you touch that door," she said very quietly, "I will tell Adrian you've been behaving erratically since he left, that you've been undermining my authority with his daughter, disrupting the staff, and that this, whatever you're doing right now, is the latest in a pattern of instability. And Adrian will believe me, because I am the woman he's chosen, and you are a maid who has been here 3 years and forgotten what that means." The kitchen was very still. "And then you will be gone," Serafina said, "and Lily will be without you permanently, which will be harder on her than anything I've done today. So I suggest you think about what serves the child better, your performance right now, or your presence over the long term." It was Beatrice recognized an extremely intelligent threat. It used her love for Lily as the mechanism of her own immobilization. It was so precisely constructed that for 3 full seconds she stood in the kitchen and felt the paralysis of it, the horrible calculus of whether fighting now meant losing the ability to fight later. Then Lily stopped making sounds. The silence from behind the door was louder than any of what had come before it. Beatrice turned and walked to the door to the hallway. "Where are you going?" Serafina said. Beatrice did not answer her. She went up the stairs, walked down the corridor to the east wing, stopped outside the door she had never opened. Adrian Rossi's private office. The room with the mahogany door and the keypad entry and the standing instruction that was as close to an absolute law as anything in the Rossi household. This room does not exist for domestic staff. She had the code because she cleaned the hallway outside it, and because 3 months ago a circuit in the keypad had shorted and an electrician had repaired it and reset the code and had recited it aloud while making notes, and Beatrice had been in the hallway with a dust cloth and she had heard it, and she had filed it away the way she filed everything away. Not because she planned to use it, but because she had spent her whole life understanding that information and exits were the same thing. She punched in the code. The door opened. The office was dark wood and leather and one wall of windows looking over the frozen backgrounds of the estate. On the desk, among several other items, was the phone, a separate handset from the household system, matte black, with a single contact programmed into it. She had heard it described twice in 3 years. The emergency line. Use only if it's real. She picked it up. Her hand was shaking. She noticed it with a remote, factual clarity. She pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Who is this?" Adrian Rossi's voice, not a question, a demand. Beatrice Vale opened her mouth, and for a single suspended second, all 3 years of her careful invisibility pressed against the inside of her throat. Then she said, "This is Beatrice, the maid. Your daughter is locked in the cellar and she's not breathing right and she didn't have her inhaler." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of a man who hadn't heard. The silence of a man processing something that had reorganized the room around him. "How long?" he said. "I don't know. I found the door 10 minutes ago, maybe longer." "The key?" "Serafina has it. She won't give it to me." Another silence. Different quality. "Go back to that door," he said. "Stay there. Don't move." "You're hours away," Beatrice said. "She doesn't have—" "Go to the door," he said. And his voice had changed into something that had no temperature in it at all. "And stay there. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she said. The line went dead. She put the handset down on the desk and looked at it for 1 moment. Then she walked back through the office, back down the corridor, back down the stairs and through the kitchen, past Serafina, who watched her from the counter with an expression that had added a new layer to it, something between assessment and the beginning of something darker, and she pressed her back against the cold cellar door and put her palm flat against the wood and said quietly to whatever was behind it, "I'm here. I'm right here. Stay awake." She did not know if Lily could hear her. She did not know how far away Adrian was or how fast he was moving. She did not know what happened to a maid who broke into the private office of a man like Adrian Rossi and used his emergency line and was wrong. She knew only that the door was cold against her back and the estate was very quiet and Lily was on the other side of it. She stayed exactly where she was. 17 minutes later, the front doors of the Rossi estate blew open. The doors didn't open so much as surrender. That was the only word for it. The heavy mahogany panels of the Rossi estate's front entrance came apart with a force that wasn't violent exactly, but absolute. The way a dam doesn't break so much as decide it's finished holding. Both doors swung wide simultaneously, and the cold February air came through first. And then Adrian Rossi came through behind it, and the hallway rearranged itself around him the way rooms do when someone with that particular quality of presence enters them. He was still in his business clothes. Gray suit, no tie, the collar of the jacket carrying the wrinkles of a man who had been moving fast through spaces not designed for speed. Behind him were two men Beatrice had seen before at the perimeter of the estate, close protection, not household staff. Men who existed in the category of things you acknowledged the presence of without looking at directly. They came through the doors and fanned out and became part of the architecture of the hallway without speaking. Adrian didn't look at them. He was already looking at the hallway, and then at the kitchen door at the far end of it, and then his eyes found Beatrice, still pressed against the wall at the top of the cellar staircase, her back against the door she hadn't left in 17 minutes. He crossed the distance between them in 8 seconds. Up close, his face was a study in something that had burned through several emotional registers and come out the other side as pure function. Not calm, past calm. The place beyond it where a person has simply converted every feeling into forward motion. His eyes went to her face, took inventory. The bruising along her left cheekbone where Serafina's palm had connected 40 minutes earlier. An event that had happened fast, without preamble, when Beatrice had refused to move away from the cellar door. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. "Key," he said. "She has it. The kitchen." He turned. Serafina was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had repositioned herself since Beatrice had come back downstairs, had found an angle and a posture that communicated composure, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe, chin level, the expression of a woman who was prepared for this moment and had decided how she was going to move through it. She was very good at it. Even now, even with Adrian coming down the hallway toward her with that particular quality of motion, she was very good at it. "Adrian," she said. Her voice carried a precise note of relief underneath a layer of collected calm. "I'm so glad you're here. There's been an incident, sir. Beatrice has been behaving—" "The key," he said. She stopped. "To the cellar," he said. "Now." A beat passed. Beatrice watched Serafina's calculation happen in real time. The rapid assessment of whether the composure strategy was still viable or whether it had already been rendered obsolete by something in his face. She watched the conclusion get reached. Serafina reached into the pocket of her blazer and produced a small brass key. She held it out. Adrian took it without touching her hand and turned back to the cellar door. Beatrice stepped aside. He inserted the key, turned it, and pulled the door open and went through it and down the narrow stone stairs before the door had finished swinging, and Beatrice went after him, and the air coming up from the cellar level hit her like a wall. Damp and cold, the particular cold of underground spaces that don't circulate, that hold temperature the way stone holds everything, permanently and without negotiation. The light at the bottom of the stairs was a single overhead fixture, fluorescent, throwing everything in that flat institutional light that makes colors wrong. The cellar was longer than it looked from the entrance, a corridor with wine storage on one side and shelving on the other, and at the far end, a small space that had been used at various times for various storage purposes and was not designed for human occupation. Lily was on the floor. She was against the far wall, her back against the stone, her knees drawn up, and she was breathing. That was the first thing, the thing that registered before everything else, that she was breathing. But the breathing was shallow and audible from across the room, each inhale carrying a thin, reedy quality that meant her airways were doing only part of the work they were supposed to be doing. Adrian crossed the cellar in 4 strides and went down on one knee in front of her, and his hands went to her face. Not grabbing, just framing, the way you hold something that matters more than anything, cupped and careful. And he said her name in a voice that contained nothing of what Beatrice had ever associated with Adrian Rossi. "Lily, I'm here, look at me." Lily's eyes opened. They found him. Something in her face broke open and reassembled in the same instant. "Daddy?" The word came out in 2 syllables that cost her. "I know. I've got you. Don't talk." Beatrice was already moving. She had come down the stairs carrying the one thing she'd had the presence of mind to retrieve before following him down, Lily's emergency inhaler, from the cabinet beside Lily's bed where it lived at all times, and where Beatrice checked for it every single morning as part of her routine, a habit she had started 8 months ago after Lily's first attack, and had never broken. She'd gone for it the moment the front doors had blown open, while Adrian was still crossing the hallway. She came down beside them on the cold stone floor, on Lily's other side, and she held out the inhaler. Adrian took it. He shook it twice, cap off, and held it to Lily's mouth. "Breathe out first. Slow." Lily breathed out. "Now in." He pressed the canister. The sound of the inhaler dispensing into the cold air of the cellar. Lily held the breath for 5 seconds. Counting internally, Beatrice could see her doing it, the particular stillness of a child who has been trained in her own emergency, and then exhaled. They did it twice more. The third exhale came out differently, looser, the reedy quality at the edges of it beginning to soften. Adrian stayed on one knee in front of his daughter for a long time without moving, his hands still framing her face, his thumbs at her temples, watching the color come back into her. His back was to Beatrice, and she could not see his expression, but she could see the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness of a man who has been running on adrenaline and has now arrived at the thing he was running toward, and the body doesn't know yet what to do with the momentum. "How long?" he said. Not to Beatrice, not to Lily, to the room. "I found the door locked approximately 25 minutes before you arrived," Beatrice said. "I don't know how long before that." A sound came from Adrian that was not a word. It lasted less than a second and then was gone, covered over by the same controlled surface he always maintained. But Beatrice had heard it, and she understood what it was. The sound that escapes when a person glimpses, very briefly, the version of events where they were 40 minutes later, or an hour, or didn't come back at all. Lily reached up and grabbed the front of his jacket with both hands. He let her. He put one arm around her and stayed exactly where he was on the cold stone floor and let her hold the fabric of his jacket in both fists, and the cellar was very quiet. Beatrice stayed where she was, on the floor on Lily's other side, close enough to be present without being in the center of what was happening. Her left cheekbone had begun to produce a dull, persistent throb that she was filing in the category of things to address later. The cold from the stone floor was working through the fabric of her uniform and into her knees, and she did not move. After a while, Lily's breathing leveled out completely. After a while longer, Lily turned her head and looked at Beatrice. Her eyes were dry. She was past the phase of the thing that produces tears. She was in the afterward when you're very tired and the feeling has been through you already. "I knew you'd come back," she said. Beatrice felt something happen in her chest. She kept her face steady. "I told you," she said. "Right now is what I can tell you about." Adrian turned his head at that. He looked at Beatrice for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Too many layers, too many things moving beneath the surface simultaneously. He looked at the bruise on her cheek again. His jaw tightened once and then relaxed. "Can you stand?" he said to Lily. "Yes." "Let's get you upstairs." He got to his feet and lifted Lily with him, one arm under her knees, one at her back, the unhesitating carry of a man who has done this before, and who will do it without making the person being carried feel like a burden. Lily put her face against his shoulder. Beatrice stood. Her knees ached from the cold floor. She followed them up the narrow stone stairs back into the light of the main level. Serafina was no longer in the kitchen doorway. Adrian took Lily up to her room. Beatrice went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, a habit from somewhere she couldn't trace, something she did when her nervous system needed to find the floor. The water was very cold. She stood there for a while with the water running and her hands under it. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Not Adrian's, those she knew by the weight and pace of them. These were Serafina's, the particular click of good shoes on hardwood being deployed with purpose. Beatrice turned off the water and dried her hands and waited. Serafina came into the kitchen. She had made adjustments in the time since the cellar. The composure had been reapplied with the same skill as everything else about her. Not perfect, not quite. There was something tighter around her eyes now, but competent. She was still operating. Beatrice had the vertiginous sense of watching a machine run through a contingency protocol. "I want you to understand something," Serafina said. Her voice was low and even and addressed specifically to Beatrice. "What happens next in this house is going to be a conversation between Adrian and me, and it's going to happen in private, and whatever conclusions come out of it are going to be between two adults in a relationship, not a maid and her employer." Beatrice looked at her. "Adrian is emotional right now," Serafina continued. "He's going to be reactive. That's understandable. But when he's had time to think clearly, he will weigh what I can offer this family against—" a small pause, perfectly placed. "The word of a domestic employee who broke into his private office, used his emergency line, and has been deliberately undermining my relationship with his daughter for months." Beatrice breathed. "That office is going to be an interesting problem for you," Serafina said. "There's a keypad log. It records every entry. Your code use is on it." She was right. Beatrice knew she was right. "And Adrian has certain non-negotiables," Serafina said. "Certain rules that exist because the nature of his business requires them. Privacy of that office is one of them. He has ended relationships, professional and otherwise, over smaller violations." The kitchen was very still. "I'm not your enemy," Serafina said, and the warmth came back into her voice with the smoothness of something that had been rehearsed until it felt organic. "I never have been. I think you care about Lily genuinely, and that's admirable. But caring about something doesn't give you a claim to it. And right now you are in an extremely precarious position, and the best thing you can do for Lily, the best thing you can do for yourself, is to let me manage this." Beatrice looked at the woman across the kitchen from her. She looked at the precise arrangement of her expression, the calibrated sincerity in her eyes, the hand resting on the counter at the exact angle of casual confidence. She thought about Lily's voice in the cellar. "I knew you'd come back." "You locked a child with asthma in an underground room without her inhaler," Beatrice said. "That's what happened today." Serafina's expression didn't change. "You hit me," Beatrice said. "When I wouldn't move away from the door, you hit me. I don't know what you're talking about." "Your hand, my face." Beatrice's voice stayed level. "I know what happened." "You're upset," Serafina said. "I understand. You're not thinking clearly." "Mr. Rossi." The voice came from the kitchen doorway. They both turned. Adrian was standing in the doorway. He had changed. Not clothes, but something in the architecture of how he was holding himself. He'd come back down from Lily's room, and he was standing in the doorway of his kitchen looking at the two women in it, with the gray-green eyes that gave away nothing and saw everything. He looked at Serafina. "My office," he said. Not a request. Serafina moved. One last look at Beatrice. Quick, sharp, a blade wrapped in composure. And then she walked past Adrian into the hallway. Adrian didn't move immediately. He stood in the doorway for a moment looking at Beatrice. His gaze moved to her cheekbone. Stayed there. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine." "Beatrice." The name came out with a particular quality. Not hard, not soft, just exact. "Sit down." She sat at the kitchen table. He went to the freezer and came back with a cloth wrapped around ice and set it on the table in front of her, and then he turned and walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway, and a moment later she heard the sound of his office door closing. She sat at the table with the ice pack in front of her. She picked it up and pressed it to her cheek and breathed. Through the walls of the kitchen she could hear, distantly, the sound of voices from the direction of the east wing. She couldn't make out words. She didn't try. She sat with the ice against her face and the cold of the stone floor still living in her knees, and the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from sustaining a certain kind of alertness for hours past its natural limit. She sat there for 20 minutes. Then the door to the east wing opened, and footsteps came down the hall, and Serafina appeared in the kitchen doorway. Something had changed. The composure was still present, but it had been pulled tighter, like fabric under tension, and beneath it something else was moving. Her eyes found Beatrice at the table with the ice pack, and they stayed there for a moment with a quality that had nothing of the earlier measured strategy in it. This was something raw, not quite panic, not yet. "He wants to see you," she said. Her voice was even. The effort required to make it even was visible to Beatrice in a way it hadn't been before. Beatrice set down the ice pack and stood. She walked past Serafina in the doorway, close enough to catch the subtle tension in the woman's stillness, the controlled quality of someone holding something in very tight. The hallway was quiet. Beatrice walked to the east wing and stopped outside the door of Adrian Rossi's private office. The second time today she had stood in this spot, the first time from the outside with the door closed between her and a decision, the second time now with the door standing open and Adrian sitting behind the desk in the amber light of the desk lamp, looking at something in front of him. She went in. The office looked different from inside in normal light, not smaller but more specific. The details she hadn't registered on the first visit resolved now. The framed property maps on the wall, the orderly stacks of folders, a photograph on the desk turned at an angle she couldn't see from where she stood. The emergency handset was back in its cradle. He would have seen when he came in that it had been moved. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. He looked up from the desk. "Tell me what happened," he said. "From the beginning. Everything." She told him. She didn't perform it, didn't add weight to it or try to preempt his conclusions. She started from the day the staff was reduced and went through it in order. The isolation of Lily, the drawings in the bin, the discontinued counselor appointments, the breakfast conversation, the escalation she had observed in increments that she had been telling herself were manageable right up until the moment they weren't. She told him about the cellar door and what she had heard behind it. She told him about the kitchen and what Serafina had said to her. She told him about the office. "I know the code," she said. "I heard it when the keypad was repaired 3 months ago. I should have—" She stopped. "I used it. I used your emergency line. I understand that's a violation." He was quiet for a moment. "She hit you," he said. "Yes." "In my house?" "Yes." He looked at the surface of his desk for a moment. Something moved through his expression that was brief and absolute. "The keypad log," he said. "You know about it." "She told me, Serafina, in the kitchen." A pause. "She said you'd ended relationships for smaller violations." "She's not wrong about that." Beatrice held his gaze. "My daughter is upstairs breathing," he said, "because you used that phone." The room was quiet. "She also told you that you've been undermining her relationship with Lily," he said, "deliberately." "She told you that too." "Is it true?" "No." She let the word sit by itself. "I have been watching what was happening to Lily, and I have been, careful with the language, careful, present in ways that were probably in excess of my role. I know that. I also know what I saw." He was looking at her directly, not the way men in his position generally looked at domestic staff. Through them, past them, the particular blindness of people who have become comfortable with invisibility in others. He was looking at her the way he might look at someone across a table in a negotiation, reading the information in her face. "She's going to tell you it was a misunderstanding," Beatrice said. "The cellar. She's going to say Lily was having an episode and she needed containment and she misjudged how long. She's going to make it sound like a mistake instead of a choice." "I know what she's going to say." "Do you know why she'd make that choice?" He was quiet. "Because Lily doesn't want her," Beatrice said. "She never did. And whatever Serafina needs from this family, she needs Lily to accept her for it to work. And Lily won't, so she's been—" She stopped, started again. "She's been trying to break the child down until she's too afraid and too confused to resist." That's what today was. The silence in the office held for a long moment. Adrian Rossi stood up from behind the desk. He was tall. She'd always known that, you couldn't not know it. But standing in this room with the door closed and the desk lamp throwing its amber light across the wood-paneled walls, the height registered differently. He came around the desk and stood a few feet from her, and his expression had the quality of something that has arrived at a conclusion and is now simply existing with it. "Go check on Lily," he said. "Mr. Rossi, go check on my daughter." A pause. "And Beatrice, what you did today with that phone? I haven't decided what to do about it yet. Understand?" She understood. She understood that in his world, precedents mattered as much as outcomes, and that the outcome today had been the right one and the precedent was still a problem, and that both of those things were true simultaneously, and he was not the kind of man who let the first cancel out the second. "Yes," she said. She went to the door. "Beatrice." She stopped. "The bruise on your face," he said. "Did anyone else see it happen?" The security guard at the gate wasn't inside. The chef had left. It was only the two of us. He nodded once. She went out. She went upstairs to Lily's room and eased the door open. Lily was in bed, the weighted blanket, the one she only accepted when it was wrapped around the stuffed bear first, and someone had remembered, had done it correctly, pulled up to her chin, and she was asleep. The breathing was even. The color in her face was back. Beatrice stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she went to the small chair by the window that she sometimes sat in during the bad nights, and she sat in it, and she watched Lily sleep. And she did not let herself think about what was happening at the other end of the house, or what Serafina was saying in whatever conversation was currently finishing, or what Adrian Rossi's decision about a maid who broke into his office would look like when it arrived. She thought about the drawings, the ones she had rescued from the bin and put in the cabinet in her room, still there, still intact. Outside the window, the Chicago night was clear and bitter, the kind of cold that makes the city look sharper than it is, all the edges crystalline and precise. An hour passed. Then she heard it, footsteps in the corridor outside the room, stopping outside the door, and a pause, and then the sound of heels retreating, not running, but moving with a speed that carried weight in it. Followed, 30 seconds later, by Adrian's voice somewhere in the distance of the house, saying a single sentence in a register she had never heard from him before. Low and absolute, and carrying none of the controlled neutrality she associated with him, and then the sound of the front door of the Rossi estate opening for the second time tonight, and this time closing behind only one person. Beatrice sat in the chair by Lily's window and heard the sound of the estate resettling into a new configuration, and she understood that whatever had just happened at the other end of the house had crossed a line that did not uncross. She just didn't know yet what Serafina had said to him, or what she had done in the years before this night that had finally made it visible. She found out what Serafina had said at 11:14 that night, not from Adrian, from the estate itself, from the particular way a house carries information through its walls and floors when the people moving through it have stopped being careful. Beatrice had stayed in the chair by Lily's window until she was certain the child's sleep had moved past the fragile surface layer into something deeper and more stable. Then she had eased out of the room and pulled the door to and stood in the corridor for a moment, listening. The house had the quality of aftermath, that specific stillness that settles into spaces after something has broken inside them, quieter than ordinary quiet, weighted differently. She went downstairs. Adrian was in the main sitting room off the foyer, not sitting, standing at the window that looked out onto the motor court with his back to the room and a glass of something amber in his hand that he had not touched since pouring it. His two security men were visible in the foyer through the open doorway, standing in the particular way trained men stand when they are waiting for instruction, upright, outward-facing, professionally absent. On the low table in the center of the sitting room was a folder. Beatrice stopped in the doorway. Adrian turned. He looked at her for a moment, then looked at the folder on the table. "Come in," he said. She came in. He crossed to the table and picked up the folder and held it out to her. She took it. The tab on the folder had no label. Inside were documents, printed pages, some with official letterheads she didn't immediately recognize, some that appeared to be photographed communications, and one that was a financial summary she couldn't fully parse, but whose column totals were large enough that the numbers registered as abstractions rather than quantities. "Third page," he said. She turned to it. The page was a contact summary. Names, dates, communication records. At the top was a name she recognized because it had appeared in household conversations in the careful, oblique way that names appeared in the Rossi household when they represented something significant and unspoken. Dario Fenn. She had heard the name once, from a conversation she wasn't meant to hear, about 8 months ago. She hadn't known what it meant then. She'd filed it. Serafina Voss's name was in the contact summary 11 times across a period of 14 months. The first entry predated her introduction to Adrian by 4 months. Beatrice stood with the folder in her hands and looked at the page and felt the information arrive in her body before her mind had fully assembled the implications of it. A physical sensation, like pressure dropping, the way the air changes before weather. "She was introduced to me through a mutual contact," Adrian said. He was not looking at the folder. He was looking at the window or at something beyond it. "Someone I trusted. Someone who had been inside my professional circle for 11 years. A pause. "The contact summary in your hand documents communications between Serafina and Dario Fenn beginning 14 months ago, 4 months before she and I met." Beatrice looked up. "Fenn runs an organization that has been attempting to acquire specific assets of mine for 3 years, Adrian said. "Unsuccessfully, because certain aspects of how I operate are protected by the fact that they exist within the family structure. Trust arrangements, property holdings, certain accounts that require dual authorization." He finally turned from the window and looked at her directly. Dual authorization, meaning a Rossi family member and the designated head of household. The room was very quiet. "She wasn't trying to be Lily's mother," Beatrice said. "No. She needed to be your wife." "Yes." "How long have you known?" "I received the first indication 6 weeks ago," he said. "Incomplete. Enough to begin a more careful look, not enough to act on." He set down the untouched glass on the side table. "Tonight I received the rest of it. My people have been working on the verification since I left for Milwaukee, and it landed while I was in the car." Beatrice stood with the folder in her hands and processed what she was being told and what she was not being told. And the part she was not being told was the part that sat at the center of everything and gave it its particular weight. He had known, or begun to know, before tonight. He had left for Milwaukee with a partial picture of what Serafina was, and he had left Lily in the house with her. She did not say this. She was not, in any of the configurations of her position in this household, the person who said this to this man. But he saw it. He was, as she had observed over 3 years, a man who saw the things people chose not to say. "I underestimated what she'd do in 4 days," he said. There was nothing in his voice that was asking for absolution. He was stating something precisely and without cover. "That's on me." The room held the statement. "What happens now?" Beatrice said. Not a challenge, an actual question. "Now it gets handled," he said, and his voice on those 3 words had a quality she didn't want to examine too closely, because she understood the vocabulary of his world well enough to know that handled was not a synonym for reported to the appropriate authorities. She closed the folder. "Beatrice." Something in his voice shifted register. "What you did tonight, the office, the phone, I told you I hadn't decided. I've decided." She stood still. "You did what the situation required," he said. "In my world, that matters more than how it was done. You protected my daughter when the people I put in place to protect her failed." A pause. "You're not dismissed." She exhaled a small and involuntary thing. "But I need you to understand something," he continued. "What you know from that folder, what you've seen in this house over the last 4 days, that information doesn't leave this estate. Not to the agency, not to anyone outside." He was looking at her directly. "Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. "Then go get some sleep. You look like you've been through a building." For a moment she almost said something about the drawings in her cabinet, and what Lily had looked like on the cellar floor, and the specific way the child had grabbed her father's jacket with both fists and refused to let go. She held all of it. "Good night," she said. She went upstairs. She did not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in her staff room on the third floor and watched the ceiling and felt the events of the day settle into her body the way shock settles. Not all at once, but in waves, each one smaller and colder than the last, until what was left was a residue of exhaustion, so thorough it had passed the stage where sleep was accessible. Her cheek had stiffened around the bruise. She pressed 2 fingers to it in the dark and felt the shape of it, precise and particular. Outside the window, Chicago's winter pressed itself against the glass. She was still awake at 3 in the morning when she heard, from somewhere in the lower floors of the house, the sound of male voices in consultation. Adrian and someone she didn't recognize, talking in the particular low register of men conducting business that doesn't occur at ordinary hours. She lay with her eyes open and did not try to make out the words, and eventually the voices stopped and the house went quiet again. She finally slept somewhere around 4. She was awake again at 6. The following 3 days had the disorienting quality of weather after a storm. The sky technically clear, the temperature dropping, everything carrying the afterprint of what had moved through. Serafina was gone from the estate. The reduced staff were quietly restored to their positions, though the explanation offered for why they'd been sent home was vague, and no one asked for more than it provided. The grief counselor's appointment was reinstated with a call from Adrian's assistant on the first morning. No explanation given for the cancellation. Lily came downstairs for breakfast. She was quiet, quieter than her ordinary quiet, which was saying something, and she sat at the breakfast table with her sketchbook open beside her plate, and she drew while she ate, which was something she had not done in the preceding days because the sketchbook had been in the trash and then in Beatrice's cabinet. Beatrice had returned it without ceremony, simply placing it on Lily's desk the previous evening, and Lily had looked at it for a long moment and then picked it up and held it to her chest before setting it on the nightstand beside her bed. The first morning, she drew horses. The second morning, she drew a house. A very specific house, rendered with the detailed observation that Lily brought to things she was trying to understand. 4 stories, tall windows, a fountain in what might have been a courtyard. She showed it to Beatrice without speaking. "That's a very good house," Beatrice said. Lily looked at the drawing critically. "It needs more windows. The real one has more." "On the east side," Beatrice said. 4 across on the second floor." Lily added them. She studied the result and seemed satisfied and went back to her eggs. Beatrice looked at the drawing and felt something in her that was not quite grief and not quite relief and had no ready name. Adrian moved through those days with a focused, contained energy that Beatrice recognized from the way a fire looks when it's been properly contained, burning steadily, directionally, with none of the waste of an open flame. He made calls. He received visitors in the office with the mahogany door. He ate dinner with Lily at the long dining room table each evening and helped her with the math workbook she'd been assigned by her tutor. And when she asked him something about numbers, he answered it in the particular patient register he only used with her, different from every other register she had heard him use. On the third morning, Lily asked where Serafina was. She asked it flatly, across the breakfast table, the way children ask the questions they've been holding, without preparation, without particular emotion visible on the surface, but with the weight of having held it for several days. Adrian looked at her from across the table. "She's not going to be coming back," he said. Lily considered this. "Okay," she said. She went back to her drawing. It was not, Beatrice thought, the response of a child who was surprised. It was the response of a child who had been waiting for the information to align with what she already knew. Beatrice carried that thought with her into the 4th day, which was when everything she believed about the current configuration of the household turned out to be wrong. She found out at 2 in the afternoon. She had been in the 3rd floor linen room, restoring the supply inventory that had been disrupted during the days of reduced staff, when she heard a car in the motor court. Not unusual. The estate received vehicles regularly. She went to the small window at the end of the corridor that looked down onto the courtyard and saw a car she didn't recognize. Black sedan, different plates from the one she associated with Adrian's regular vehicles or his team. A man got out. She saw him from above, mid-50s, broad through the shoulders, with the particular deliberate movement of someone who takes up space as a matter of policy. He wore a gray coat and carried nothing, and he looked at the front of the estate with the expression of someone who has been here before or who intends to behave as though he has. He went inside. Beatrice went back to the linens and told herself it was none of her business. 40 minutes later, Adrian appeared at the door of the linen room. This was unusual. Adrian Rossi did not come to the third-floor linen room. The geography of the household had a logic to it, and the logic placed him in the lower floors, in the office, in the dining room, in Lily's room, not in the service spaces. She turned from the shelves. His expression was the controlled surface she was accustomed to, but there was something different in the quality of it, a tightness that had been added in the last 40 minutes, like a piece of fabric that's been stretched and hasn't fully returned. "The man downstairs," he said. "Has Lily seen him?" "She's in her room. I don't think so. I need her to stay in her room for the next hour." "I can stay with her." "Yes." He paused in the doorway for a moment, and something in his posture was doing work she couldn't fully interpret. "He's here about Serafina." She waited. "She had a partner inside the organization," he said. "Someone positioned close enough to provide information to Fenn's network over a period of approximately 2 years. A pause. "We identified him this morning." Beatrice held the folded towel in her hands and looked at him. "The contact who introduced me to Serafina," he said. 11 years. The weight of that, 11 years, trusted circle, someone positioned close enough, landed in the room between them. "He's here to explain himself," Adrian said. His voice was entirely flat. "And you're going to let him?" "I'm going to listen." He looked at her with something that had no particular warmth in it, but was, somehow, direct in a way that communicated a kind of accounting. "Go be with Lily." She went. She spent the next hour in Lily's room with the door closed, sitting in the chair by the window, while Lily drew in her sketchbook and asked occasional questions about horses and whether Chicago had ever had snow in April and why soup was called soup. Beatrice answered each question with the same steady attention she gave everything, and underneath the steadiness she was aware of something moving through the lower floors of the house that she could not see and was not supposed to see. At 3:47, the car left the motor court. Beatrice watched it from the window. She noted that the man who had arrived in it was not visible in the courtyard. She did not ask. Adrian came to the door of Lily's room 20 minutes later. He looked at them, at Lily absorbed in her drawing, at Beatrice in the chair by the window, and some of the tightness in his posture had resolved, though what it had resolved into was harder to name. "How are you doing?" he said to Lily. "Good," Lily said. She held up the sketchbook. "Look." It was a horse, but a specific horse this time, a large one with detailed musculature and a slightly imperious expression that Beatrice suspected was not accidental. Adrian looked at it for a moment. "That's good," he said. "I know," Lily said. Something almost happened on his face. "Dinner at 6, he said, and went. Beatrice looked at the drawing of the horse and then at the door he'd gone through, and she thought about what she had understood and what she had not understood, and the particular weight of being someone who sees things without being invited to see them. She was still thinking about it when the message arrived. It came to the household staff communication system, a simple internal messaging application that the estate used for scheduling and supply requests, at 4:22 that afternoon. From a user account she didn't recognize. No name, just a string of numbers. The message itself was 3 sentences. "You think he's protecting you?" He made a deal with Fenn to end the investigation in exchange for Serafina and the inside man. You're the loose end they haven't figured out what to do with yet. Beatrice sat with her phone in her hands and read the message 3 times. Her chest was doing something specific and unhelpful. She registered it and set it aside. She thought about what she knew. She thought about the folder on the table and the documents, and Dario Fenn's name appearing 11 times in contact records, and what handled meant in the vocabulary of Adrian Rossi's world, and the man in the gray coat who had arrived in an unrecognized car and left without being visible in the courtyard. She thought about what a loose end meant in the same vocabulary. She turned the phone face down on her knee. She could be wrong. The message could be a manipulation. Serafina, or someone connected to Serafina, attempting to destabilize the one person inside the house who had successfully complicated her plans. That was possible. It was the most immediately available interpretation, and it had the advantage of being clean. But Beatrice Vale had spent 3 years in a household that operated at the intersection of things that were visible and things that were not, and she had survived it by taking the information that arrived in front of her seriously, even when it was uncomfortable, even when the comfortable interpretation was available. She picked the phone back up and looked at the number string again. She didn't recognize it. She thought about the man in the gray coat, and the way Adrian had said he's here to explain himself, and the car that had left the motor court with the man not visible in it. She thought about what 11 years of trusted proximity was worth to someone who operated the way Adrian Rossi operated when it came out that the trust was a transaction. She turned the phone face down again. She sat in the chair by the window of her staff room. She had come upstairs while Lily was preparing for dinner, and she looked at the winter light failing outside the glass, and she thought about what she knew, and what she could prove, and what it meant that a message like that could arrive on a household system, and what it meant that someone had access to the household system to send it. She thought about the folder she had been shown. She thought about being shown it. In her experience, in the particular and limited experience of someone who had lived her entire adult life inside spaces that other people controlled, you were not usually shown information about dangerous things as a gesture of trust. You were shown it as a gesture of enclosure, so that the information was inside you, which meant you were inside the information, which meant where you went and what you did with yourself was now entangled with something that could not survive exposure. She understood, in the sitting room with the folder in her hands, that she had been made part of something. She had not understood until now what part. Dinner at 6 was quiet. Lily ate with the focused efficiency of a child whose appetite had returned after days of disruption, working through her food with the periodic pauses of someone whose brain was running a secondary process. She asked Adrian twice about horses, whether he'd ever ridden one, whether horses in Chicago in winter wore blankets, and he answered both questions with the same patient register, and Beatrice served the meal and cleared the plates and moved through the dining room the way she had been moving through rooms for 3 years. Invisible. After dinner, she put Lily to bed. She read to her, not from the books Serafina had brought, which were still in the guest room untouched, but from the small collection of Lily's own books that lived on the shelf beside her bed and had been read often enough that their spines were soft. Lily fell asleep before the end of the chapter, her breathing even and slow, the stuffed bear properly installed inside the weighted blanket. Beatrice closed the book. She sat in the chair for a long time. Then she got up and went downstairs. Adrian was in the sitting room again, not at the window this time, but at the desk in the corner with papers in front of him and the desk lamp making a small circle of light in the otherwise dim room. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. She had the phone in her hand. She had decided, somewhere between Lily's bookshelf and the hallway, that the most dangerous thing she could do was say nothing, and the second most dangerous thing was say something, and she was going to have to choose between them, and she was going to have to do it now. She walked into the room and held out the phone with the message visible on the screen. He looked at it. The silence that followed was 14 seconds long. She counted without meaning to. Then he looked up at her, and the expression on his face was not the controlled surface she knew, and was not the thing that had been underneath it on the cellar stairs, and was not anything she had a previous data point for. And she stood in the sitting room of the Rossi estate and understood, with the clarity of someone who has just stepped onto ground they cannot test before they stand on it, that the answer to what the message meant was written in the 14 seconds it had taken him to respond to it, and the answer was not clean. The 14 seconds ended. Adrian set the phone down on the desk with a deliberateness that was its own kind of answer. Not the sharp placement of someone reacting, but the careful, considered placement of someone who has been carrying a weight and has decided where to put it down. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand." He looked at her. The lamp made sharp angles of his face. "The message," she said. "Is it true?" Not a question. She had already decided not to ask it as a question. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't absence, that's full of something moving underneath it, being sorted, being arranged into whatever form it was going to take when it came out. "Ben made contact 2 days ago," he said, "before I came back, while I was still in the car." Her hands were at her sides. She kept them still. He knew about Serafina, Adrian said. He knew I'd found the documents. He offered a resolution. Hand over the evidence, step back from the investigation, and the agreement between his network and mine stays intact. A pause. In exchange for certain things. What things? Primarily Serafina. Her safety. No consequences for what happened here. He looked at the surface of the desk, and a guarantee of silence from everyone in this household who was present during the events of the last 4 days. The sitting room was very still. Silence guaranteed how? Beatrice said. He looked up at her. That's the question, he said. She breathed. One breath, slow, through her nose. The man who came today, she said. In the gray coat. Fenn's representative. He left without She stopped. He wasn't visible when the car left. He left through the back, Adrian said. He's fine. A pause. I haven't made the agreement. But you're considering it. He held her gaze. I'm looking at what it costs not to, he said. That's different. It's not different. The words came out with more edge than she'd calibrated for. She felt it leave her and didn't pull it back. The cost of not making it is that you pursue Fenn's network and whatever damage that does to your organization. The cost of making it is… She stopped. Say it, he said. The cost of making it is that the people in this house who know what happened become a liability you either manage or eliminate. The lamp hummed. Outside the window, the Chicago night was absolute. That's a significant accusation, he said. I held up your phone and you took 14 seconds to respond to it, she said. I'm not making an accusation. I'm reading what's in front of me. Adrian Rossi stood up from behind the desk. He was doing it again. That movement that rearranged the room around him. But this time Beatrice held her ground and did not adjust her position. And he came around the desk and stopped 6 feet from her and looked at her with an expression that had the quality of something being stripped back to its essential structure. What do you want me to say? He said. I want you to tell me what you're going to do. I don't know yet. Your daughter is upstairs. Her voice did not shake. She was mildly surprised by this. Whatever you decide, your daughter is upstairs, and I am the person who spent 4 days making sure she was still breathing while you were gone, and I need to know if I should be afraid of the decision you make tonight. The room held that. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the cellar and in the office and across the kitchen earlier with the ice pack on the table, like she was something he kept having to recalibrate his understanding of. No, he said. One word. No as in you should not be afraid. His voice had the flat, absolute quality she'd learned to identify as the register where he did not say things he didn't mean. I haven't made the agreement. I'm not making the agreement. Fenn's representative left this house with a counterposition, and he'll have an answer by tomorrow morning. A pause. I told you I hadn't decided. That was true when I said it. She looked at him. The message, she said. Who sent it? Someone inside my organization who wanted you to run, he said, before I made the decision. So the decision would be made for me. Someone who benefits from the agreement. Yes. Do you know who? I have a strong idea. He looked at the phone on the desk. By tomorrow morning, I'll have more than an idea. The room breathed. Beatrice stood in the lamplight of Adrian Rossi's sitting room and felt the shape of the last 4 days settle into something she could finally hold all at once. The fear in Lily's voice in the cellar, the cold of the stone floor, the folder with its 14 months of documented betrayal, the phone message designed to send her running into a Chicago night with nowhere to go. And she felt something move through her that was not relief and was not resolution and was simply the decision to still be standing. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay, she said again. I heard you. She picked up her phone from the desk. Good night. She went upstairs. She lay in her bed with her eyes open, and this time sleep was further away than it had been the night before. And she lay with it and breathed, and at some point the house went quiet, and at some other point she heard footsteps in the corridor that weren't going anywhere threatening, and eventually the night passed. Morning came gray and specific, the kind of February morning that makes no promises. She was in the kitchen at 6:15 making coffee when Adrian came through and poured a cup and stood at the counter with it, and looked out the kitchen window at the frozen grounds with the expression of a man who has been awake for most of the night, arriving at the other side of it. "It was Gerrit," he said. She looked at him. "My logistics director. 8 years." He drank the coffee. He had a financial arrangement with Fenn that predated Serafina by 18 months. She was his suggestion. He made the introduction. "What happens to him?" "It's being handled." She looked at her coffee. "That phrase," she said, what it means in your context." He looked at her. "It means he won't be a problem." "I'm asking because I need to know if handled has a meaning I should be concerned about," she said, "given what I said last night." A pause. "He's been removed from his position and removed from the city," Adrian said. "He'll be alive. He'll be somewhere he can't access anything connected to my organization or to Fenn's." He set down the cup. "That's what I can tell you." She nodded. "And Fenn," she said. "Ben received his answer at 6 this morning. The agreement is declined. The investigation continues." He picked up the cup again. "That will have consequences. It will take time to manage them." "How much time?" "Months, possibly longer." She thought about what months meant in the vocabulary of what he was describing. The particular sustained tension of a conflict with an organized network that had demonstrated willingness to operate from the inside. She thought about Lily upstairs, about the drawing of the house with the windows on the east side that she had added on Beatrice's direction. "I'll need to increase security inside the household," he said. "Not just the perimeter, inside. People I trust inside these walls." She understood what he was telling her, or asking her. The line between the two was unclear, and she suspected it was meant to be. "I'm not leaving," she said, "if that's what you're asking." He looked at her. "I'm not leaving Lily," she said. "Whatever else happens, I'm not leaving her." Something moved across his face that lasted less than a second and was gone before she could identify it with any confidence. He turned back to the window. "Then don't," he said. That was the morning. What came after it was 3 weeks of a different kind of tension, not the acute, immediate tension of the 4 days, but something lower and more sustained, like a frequency you can feel in your back teeth. Fenn's organization did not respond immediately. Adrian had anticipated this, had explained, in one of the brief informational exchanges he had begun conducting with Beatrice, in the same way he might brief a security director, that the absence of immediate response was not absence of response, simply delay while the network recalibrated. The investigation on his end was active and running, and she was not privy to its details, and she didn't ask for them. She ran the household. That was what she did, and she did it with the same focused invisibility she'd always applied to it, except that the invisibility had changed quality. It wasn't the protective coloration of someone who needed to go unnoticed. It was the particular efficiency of someone who understood what the household required and provided it without drama. Lily came back to herself incrementally, the way recovery always happens. Not in a straight line, but in a pattern that had setbacks inside the progress. Days where she was fully present and engaged, and the drawings on her desk were dense and detailed, and her laugh showed up unexpectedly in the corridors. And then days where the quiet pressed inward again, and she sat at the window with her sketchbook closed on her lap. On the difficult days, Beatrice sat with her, not talking, not performing comfort, just present. The particular companionship of someone who understands that not all difficult things need to be addressed directly. Lily seemed to understand this. On one of the quiet days, a Thursday afternoon, gray outside the window, the fountain in the courtyard cycling its winter water, Lily looked up from the blank page in her sketchbook and said, without particular preamble, "Are you going to stay?" Beatrice looked at her. "Yes," she said, "even if it gets hard again." "It's already hard," Beatrice said. "I'm still here." Lily considered this with the focused, assessing attention she brought to things she was deciding whether to believe. Then she opened her sketchbook and started drawing. Beatrice watched her and felt the particular ache of the ordinary. The way normal life, resumed after its interruption, is almost unbearable in its value. The third week, Adrian came to the kitchen on a Wednesday evening after Lily was in bed and said, "I need to tell you something." She was at the counter. She turned. Fen has made a move, he said. Not against the investigation, against the household. He said it with the controlled evenness he used for dangerous information. No inflation, no dramatization, the flat delivery of someone who respects the weight of a thing enough not to add to it. He's identified you. She felt the kitchen floor under her feet very specifically. Identified me as the person who made the call that ended his plan, Adrian said. Serafina has cooperated with him to some degree. She told him you were the one who accessed the emergency line, that you were the one who reached me before he could complete the transition. He paused. He doesn't separate the threat from the person in these situations. You become part of the ledger. She breathed. What does that mean practically? She said. It means you're not safe outside these walls without protection, he said. It means your status inside this household needs to change to something more defensible. And it means the perimeter security increases as of tonight. She looked at him. You're telling me this, she said. Not just doing it. You've earned the information. She held that for a moment. What does status change mean, she said. It means you're not cataloged as domestic staff anymore, he said. You're household director. That changes your security clearance, your access to household communications, and he paused on this, brief but perceptible, your position in certain arrangements that govern who the estate is obligated to protect. She understood. In the legal and organizational structure of the Rossi household, she would be moved from a category with no protections to a category with explicit ones. It was, in his world, a significant thing. And in exchange, she said, in exchange for what? There's always an exchange in your world, she said. Not accusatory, observational. He looked at her for a moment. In exchange, he said, you stay. She looked at the kitchen counter, at the ordinary objects on it, a coffee cup, a folded dish towel, the ceramic bowl where they kept the fruit. I already told you I was staying, she said. Then it cost you nothing. She looked up at him. Okay, she said. The security changes happened that night. The following morning, Adrian's assistant, a woman named Cresswell, who had the particular unreadable efficiency of someone who has been processing extraordinary information for long enough that nothing registers as extraordinary anymore, came to find Beatrice in the linen room and presented her with a revised employment agreement and a new household identification card with her name under the title Director of Household Operations, and asked her to sign 3 additional documents that she read carefully before signing. She gave back the gray dress and the white apron. Cresswell had, without comment, provided a replacement wardrobe of the kind that suited the new designation. Simple, well-made, dark-colored clothing that was professional without being formal. Not a costume. Just clothes that belonged to who she was now rather than who she had been. She stood in front of the small mirror in her room. The same room, she hadn't moved, she was still on the 3rd floor, and looked at herself in the dark gray shirt and the black trousers, and the flat, quiet shoes that were essentially the same shoes because she was still the same person. She looked at the bruise, now mostly faded to a pale yellow at the edges of her cheekbone. She went to work. The 4th week was when Fen moved. It happened on a Tuesday. Beatrice was in the East Corridor at 2 in the afternoon when her new security radio, one of several changes implemented in the previous week, produced a short burst of coded communication she'd been trained to identify. She was already moving toward Lily's room before the second burst came through. She found Lily at her desk, undisturbed, drawing horses. Come with me, Beatrice said. Lily looked up. She read something in Beatrice's face and did not ask questions. She closed the sketchbook and stood up. Beatrice took her to the interior room on the 2nd floor, the windowless room that had been designated in the new security protocols as the household's safe position, reinforced door, its own communication line, stocked with water and Lily's emergency inhaler and a charged tablet and 3 of Lily's sketchbooks, because Beatrice had put them there herself the morning after the protocols were established. She settled Lily on the padded bench inside. How long? Lily asked. I don't know yet. Is my dad okay? I'm going to find out. Stay here. Lock this door from the inside after I leave and don't open it for anyone except me or your father. Lily looked at her with those dark, assessing eyes. Okay, she said. I mean it. No one else. I heard you, Lily said. Beatrice went out, heard the bolt engage from inside, felt something in her chest loosen by 1 degree. She went downstairs. The ground floor of the estate had transformed. The calm, maintained elegance of the limestone corridor was occupied now by 3 of Adrian's close protection team moving with the directed urgency of people who have received information and are acting on it. And the front doors were closed and the gate feed was visible on the monitor that had been installed in the hallway desk 2 weeks ago. And on the gate feed, there was a car parked on Caldwell Drive that did not belong to anyone Beatrice had seen before. Adrian was in the foyer. He was in a suit jacket, no tie, and he was on his phone, and he finished the call the moment she came down the stairs and looked at her with the gray-green eyes that were doing no work at all to project calm. "Lily," he said. "Safe room. Door locked. She knows not to open it." Something in his face registered this and moved past it. "Ben is not outside," he said. "The car outside is surveillance. He's already inside." A pause. Someone on the expanded staff, brought in through an agency recommendation that we're now understanding was compromised. She felt it. The cold down the center of her, the particular horror of a breach that comes from inside. "Where?" she said. "We're locating." His jaw was tight. "Stay. I'm not going to the safe room," she said. He looked at her. "Lily is in the safe room. She's locked in. I am not going to be locked away from this house while someone inside it is Beatrice." "No." Her voice was completely flat. "Tell me where." He looked at her for a second that had considerable weight in it. "Kitchen," he said. "He was identified by Marcos 30 seconds ago. He's contained but not—" She was already moving. She went through the hallway and through the dining room and hit the kitchen door with her palm, and it swung open and the kitchen was not empty. The man was against the far counter. Young, early 30s, someone she recognized as one of the newly added maintenance staff, someone whose name she had filed but whose face had not yet fully registered in her catalog. He was contained in the sense that one of Adrian's security team had a physical hold on him, but contained him perfectly, because the security man had blood on his forearm from something that had happened in the 10 seconds before the kitchen door opened, and the situation had the quality of a thing that was about to resolve badly in one of several directions. In the man's hand was a phone. Not a weapon. A phone. He was looking at her. She held his gaze and did not look away, and heard Adrian come through the door behind her, and felt the room shift with his presence, and the security man's grip tightened, and the young man's eyes went from Beatrice to Adrian, and she saw the moment when he recognized that the calculation had changed. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "Whatever you're about to do," she said. Her voice came from somewhere very quiet and very certain. "Don't." He looked at Adrian behind her. Then he looked back at her, and in his face was the expression of someone who had arrived at the end of the path they'd chosen and found it was shorter than they expected, and his hand opened. The phone hit the kitchen floor. Adrian's security man took him down in the next second, controlled and efficient, and the kitchen was briefly very loud and then was quiet again, and Beatrice stood in the center of it with her hands at her sides and her heart doing something loud and persistent in her ears, and the overhead kitchen lights very bright against the white tile of the counter. Adrian came to stand beside her. He looked at the phone on the floor, and then at the man being secured at the far counter, and then he looked at Beatrice, and she could feel him looking at her, the particular quality of attention she had catalogued over 3 years and was only now understanding she had never correctly identified. "You said don't," he said. "Yes." To a man who might have been armed. "He had a phone. You didn't know that." She breathed. "No," she said. "I didn't." The kitchen held them both. Outside on Caldwell Drive, the surveillance car that did not belong to anyone had been there for 4 hours, waiting for a signal from a phone that was now on the kitchen floor of the Rossi estate, and the signal was not coming. And upstairs, in a windowless room on the second floor, a 6-year-old girl sat on a padded bench with a locked door between her and everything that wanted to get to her, drawing horses in a sketchbook, waiting for the only 2 people in the world she trusted to come back through that door. Adrian looked at Beatrice. She looked back at him. "It's not over," he said. "I know," she said. "Ben is going to eat." "I know." She held his gaze. "I know what's coming. I've known since you showed me that folder." She felt something settle in her spine, vertebra by vertebra, into a configuration she recognized as permanent. "I'm still here." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the February dark was coming down fast over Chicago, and the estate settled into its new configuration, and in the kitchen the fluorescent lights hummed their single note, and Adrian Rossi looked at the woman standing in the center of his household. Not behind a door, not in a protected room, not invisible against a wall, and something in his face, the something in his face completed itself. It was not a smile. It was not warmth in the conventional sense. It was the expression of a man who has spent years building walls of a specific and necessary kind and has just registered, without quite deciding to register it, that one of those walls has developed a door. He looked away first. "We need to move the surveillance car situation before it moves itself," he said, and his voice was back to the operational register. And he turned to his security man, and the kitchen became functional again. The contained man being processed, the phone on the floor being photographed, and then bagged by someone who appeared with the quiet competence of a person trained for exactly this. The radio traffic picking up as the perimeter team coordinated on the car outside on Caldwell Drive. Beatrice went upstairs. She knocked on the safe room door and said her name and heard the bolt disengage and the door opened and Lily was standing there with the sketchbook under her arm and her expression carrying the composure of a child who had decided some time ago that fear was less useful than waiting. "Is it done?" Lily said. "For now," Beatrice said. Lily looked at her. "Your hands are shaking." Beatrice looked down. They were. Slightly, barely perceptibly, but present. "Yes," she said. "That happens to my dad too," Lily said. "After. He thinks I don't notice." Beatrice looked at this 6-year-old child with the sketchbook under her arm, standing in the doorway of a windowless room she'd been locked in for 40 minutes without complaint, and felt the complicated specific thing she always felt when Lily showed her one of these windows into what the child contained. "Come on," she said. "Let's go downstairs." The car on Caldwell Drive was gone by nightfall. The man from the kitchen was gone by the same time, processed through whatever mechanism Adrian's organization used for people who had served as instruments of an opposing network and been identified doing it. Beatrice did not ask for details. She had come to understand the specific placement of the line between what she needed to know and what knowing would cost her, and she had made her peace with standing at it. The estate that night had a quality she hadn't encountered before. Not the atmospheric residue of the crisis events of the previous weeks, but something else. Something that lived at a different register. Quieter. More final. Like a room after furniture has been rearranged and the new configuration has settled and the room has accepted it. Lily ate dinner with the focused appetite of someone who has been running on adrenaline and has now been given permission to be ordinary. She asked for seconds of the pasta and ate them, and then put her head down on her folded arms on the table and was asleep in approximately 4 minutes, which was something Beatrice had seen her do exactly once before, at age 5, at a point of total exhaustion. Adrian looked at his sleeping daughter across the dinner table with an expression that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 3 years learning to read the subtle geography of his face. "I've got her," Beatrice said quietly. She carried Lily upstairs. The child was heavier than she expected, or perhaps it was that she herself was more tired than she'd acknowledged. And she got the stuffed bear properly installed in the weighted blanket and Lily into the bed without fully waking her. And she turned off the light and sat in the chair by the window for a while in the dark, because the chair and the dark and the sound of Lily's even breathing had become a thing she needed the way she needed coffee in the morning, functional and unremarkable and essential. She sat there for a long time. Then she went downstairs. Adrian was in the sitting room. Not at the desk, not at the window. He was on the low sofa with his jacket off and his elbows on his knees and a glass of the amber liquid that he actually appeared to have drunk some of this time. He looked up when she came in and then looked back at his hands. She sat down in the chair across from him, not at the formal distance she would have chosen a month ago. Closer than that, the distance of someone who has been through a thing alongside another person and understands that certain distances no longer make sense. "Ben won't be done," he said, without preamble. The way he said things when he was too tired for the frame. No, she said. The investigation will produce enough to move on him. 6 months. Maybe 4 if the documentation coming out of the Milwaukee connection is as complete as it looks. He looked at his hands. Until then, the estate stays on the current security posture. I know. And you, he paused. Your situation specifically. You're in his ledger, Beatrice. That doesn't go away when the immediate pressure lifts. You'll need protection that extends outside these walls for as long as this is active. She looked at him. You're telling me I can't leave the estate. I'm telling you that if you leave with someone. That's different. He finally looked up at her. I know what that costs. She thought about it, about the specific texture of a life that had been, before this house, a particular kind of freedom, constrained by circumstance and economics and the limited mobility of someone in her position, but free in the way that invisibility is free, unobserved and therefore unaccountable. She thought about what it meant to be visible now, to be in a ledger, to be the kind of person whose presence or absence constituted a variable in someone else's strategic calculation. I made the choice when I picked up that phone, she said. You didn't know what you were choosing. I knew enough. She held his gaze. I knew Lily was on the other side of that door. That was enough. The sitting room was very still. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression that had been developing across the last several weeks into something she could almost fully read now. Almost not entirely, because there were layers in this man that had been built over a very long time and did not open quickly. I need to ask you something, he said. She waited. The drawings, he said. The ones in the trash. You took them. She breathed. Yes. Why? She thought about how to answer this. Not the honest answer. She knew the honest answer. But how to give it shape in words without making it into something that required him to respond to it. Because they were hers, she said, and someone had decided they didn't matter. And I don't leave things that matter in trash bins if I can help it. He looked at her. Where are they? He said. In my room, in the cabinet. He was quiet for a moment. Can I see them? He said. She went and got them. She came back downstairs with the 2 recovered sketchbooks and set them on the low table in front of him and sat back down in the chair and watched him pick up the first one. He went through it slowly. Not flipping, not scanning, looking. The way someone looks at something when they understand they've missed it and are now making up for the missing. He turned each page with a careful deliberateness, and his expression did the complicated thing it did when Lily was involved. The thing that dismantled the controlled surface and left something rawer in its place. He got to the drawing she had kept the longest. The small figure in a gray dress standing between a child and a dark shape, done 8 months in, the one that had made her put it in the cabinet in the first place. He held it. This is you, he said. I think so. She drew this 8 months in. Yes. He looked at it for a long time. I didn't see it, he said. What was happening to her? In those 4 days, I didn't... He stopped. I knew Serafina was something other than what she presented. I knew that for 6 weeks. But I told myself Lily was fine, that the household was managed. He set the sketchbook down. I left my daughter in that house with that woman because I was trying to find enough evidence to act on cleanly, and I calculated wrong. The room held that. She's okay, Beatrice said. Because of you. She's strong, Beatrice said. She's been strong this whole time. She just needed someone to hold the door. He looked at her with something she finally, sitting in the lamplight of the Rossi sitting room on a Tuesday night in February with the city cold outside and the house quiet above them, identified correctly. It was the look of someone who has been alone in a particular way for a very long time and has just encountered the specific, vertiginous recognition that they do not have to be. She held it without deflecting. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's going to require a lot of you. He breathed. Something in his posture released by a degree. Yes, he said. She stood up. He looked up at her. Beatrice, he said. She stopped. What you said? That you're still here. A pause, the kind that means the words after it have been considered. I want you to know what that means to me. She looked at him. I know, she said. She went upstairs. The months that followed were not easy. She had known they wouldn't be, and she had chosen them anyway. And on the days when the weight of that choice pressed down hardest, when the security protocols chafed, when the world outside the walls felt remote and theoretical, when she looked at herself in the mirror of her third-floor room and asked the question that came regardless of how certain you are, she went back to the simple fact of Lily at the breakfast table drawing horses, and the question answered itself. Fenn's network did not come quietly. There were 3 additional incidents in the 4 months after the kitchen confrontation. None inside the estate, all at the perimeter or in the adjacent professional operations that Adrian's organization maintained. The first was a data breach attempt against one of the shipping companies that was identified and contained before it caused damage. The second was more direct, a confrontation involving 2 members of Adrian's extended team on the south side of the city that resulted in injuries Beatrice heard about through the change in Adrian's expression when he came home on a Wednesday evening and sat at dinner with Lily and was present but not fully, his attention divided between the table and something internal that had no place at the dinner table. After Lily was in bed that night, she had asked him. He had told her. 2 men hurt, 1 seriously, both would recover. She had sat with him in the sitting room until after midnight, not talking for most of it, just present, which was, she had come to understand, one of the things she provided that he had not previously had access to. Someone who could be in the room with the difficult things without needing them to be different, or smaller, or more manageable than they were. The third incident was the decisive one. It happened in the 5th month, on a Friday morning, when the documentation that Adrian's team had been assembling cross-referenced financial records, communication logs, the cooperation of 2 individuals inside Fenn's network who had made calculations about which side of an eventual outcome they wanted to be on, reached a threshold that made a certain kind of action possible. The action was not one that Beatrice was part of. It happened over the course of a weekend, in places she did not know about, through mechanisms she did not ask to understand. Adrian was absent from the estate for 36 hours. He called twice, once to confirm he was operational, and once, at 11 on Saturday night, for no discernible reason except to ask if Lily had eaten dinner, and to say nothing for a moment after she told him yes, and then to say he'd be back Sunday. He came back Sunday. He came through the front door at 2 in the afternoon, and Lily heard the car in the motor court and came down the stairs with her sketchbook under her arm and the particular focused velocity of a child who has been managing her own anticipation for 36 hours and has reached its limit. And she went down the last 4 steps and across the foyer and hit him at waist height with the full force of her forward momentum, and he caught her with both arms and lifted her and stood there in the foyer of the Rossi estate, holding his daughter with his face pressed to the top of her head and his eyes closed. Beatrice stood at the top of the stairs. She watched it and felt the watching of it in her chest and let herself feel it without qualification. After a while, Adrian looked up and saw her. "It's done," he said. She breathed. "Done as in." "Done," he said. Fenn's network is restructured around people who have decided cooperation is preferable to the alternative. The investigation is complete. The threat to this household is... He paused. Lily was still attached to him with considerable tenacity. "It's done, Beatrice." She came down the stairs. She stopped at the bottom and looked at him. Really looked. The way she had learned to look at people in the spaces they didn't know they were opening, in the gap between what they were managing and what they were. And she saw the exhaustion in him, thorough and specific, the exhaustion of someone who has been sustaining a significant tension for a very long time and has just set it down. "Go sit down," she said. "I'll get Lily lunch, and then she can tell you about the horse she's been drawing for 4 days." He looked at her. "It's a very specific horse," she said. Something in his face came loose in the particular way it did when she said something unexpected. Not quite a smile. The thing that lived next to one. "I'll want to hear about it," he said. "I know you will." She went to the kitchen. She made lunch. She made it the same way she had made everything in this household over the course of 5 months that had reconstructed her life into something she hadn't planned and wouldn't trade, with the focused, quiet competence of someone who understands that the ordinary acts of care are not small, that feeding people and making rooms habitable and ensuring that a child has what she needs to sleep and wake and feel safe are not lesser versions of the important work. They are the important work, the the specific gravity that holds a household together when everything else is trying to pull it apart. She set the food on the table. Lily came in with the sketchbook and showed Adrian the horse before she sat down. 4 days of a very specific, imperious horse with detailed musculature and an expression that managed to convey both nobility and mild irritation. And Adrian looked at it with the full attention he gave Lily's drawings now, the attention that was different from what it had been before, more present, more specific, as though he had understood something about what these drawings contained and had adjusted his relationship to them accordingly. "What's his name?" he said. Lily considered. "Marcus." "Why Marcus?" "He looks like a Marcus." Adrian looked at the drawing again. "He does," he said. Lily sat down and ate. The afternoon moved through the house at the slow pace of February light, long and amber, and eventually deepening toward the blue-gray of early dark. Adrian was in his office for part of it, closing out whatever needed closing, and then he was in the sitting room with Lily, who was drawing on the floor while he read, and Beatrice moved through the household doing the small necessary things that constituted its daily maintenance. And none of it was dramatic, and none of it was the kind of scene that announces itself as significant, and it was, for that reason, the most significant afternoon she could remember. At 4 o'clock, she was in the upstairs corridor when Adrian came out of the sitting room and came up the stairs and stopped beside her in the hallway outside the linen room. She looked at him. "I've been thinking about what I want to say to you," he said. "I've been thinking about it for a while." "You don't have to." "I know I don't." He looked at her. "I want to." She waited. "I've been operating this household and this organization for 7 years on the understanding that the people around me were assets and risks," he said. "That everyone inside these walls had a position and a function and a ledger entry, and the ledger was how I managed the uncertainty of being the person responsible for all of it." A pause. "That's not wrong exactly, but it's incomplete." The hallway was quiet. From downstairs came the faint sound of Lily's pencil on paper. "You didn't have a ledger entry that covered what you did," he said. "You acted outside every protocol this household had. You made yourself visible when everything in your position and your history pointed towards staying hidden. You did it for a child who wasn't yours in a situation that could have destroyed you." He held her gaze. "And you stayed. After all of it. You stayed." She looked at him. "I see you," he said. "I want you to know that. Whatever else changes or doesn't change, I see you. I should have said it earlier." The hallway held the sentence. Beatrice Vale stood in the corridor of the Rossi estate, the same corridor she had walked through 1,000 times with clean linens under her arm and her eyes on the floor. And she let the sentence land. "I know," she said. "I'm not certain you do." "I do," she said. "I've known for a while." She breathed. "Knowing isn't the same as needing to hear it, but I appreciate that you said it." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that had finished becoming whatever it was becoming, fully arrived, fully present, no more movement underneath it. "There's a gathering next month," he said. "The full organizational circle. Everyone who operates within the Rossi structure." He paused. "I'd like you to be there. Not as staff." She understood what he was telling her. In the vocabulary of his world, presence at that gathering in a non-staff capacity communicated something specific and irreversible about position and trust and the particular kind of claim that existed between people in his circle. "That's a significant thing to ask," she said. "Yes." "You understand what it means, what it says to those people." "I understand exactly what it says," he said. "That's why I'm asking." She looked at him, at the gray-green eyes that gave away nothing and had, over the course of 5 months, begun to give her specifically quite a lot. "Okay," she said. He nodded once. He went back downstairs. She stood in the corridor for a moment, her hand resting on the linen room door frame, and she let the quiet of the house come into her. The sound of Lily's pencil, the low ambient hum of the estate's heat system, the particular February silence of a house that has been through a storm and has come out the other side intact, not unmarked, not unchanged, but standing. She thought about the woman she had been at the beginning of all this, a gray dress, white apron, eyes down, moving through rooms without displacing air. She had been skilled at that. It had kept her employed and safe for 3 years. It was not nothing, but it was also not everything she was, and she had known that for longer than she'd been willing to admit, filed it away in the careful internal catalog alongside all the other things she had observed and retained and not known yet what to do with. She had known what to do with it when the door was locked and the child was on the other side of it, and the choice between her safety and Lily's had resolved itself with a clarity that left no room for the more complicated calculations. That was who she was, had always been. The gray dress had been a costume for a self that was too much for the spaces she was allowed to occupy, and she had worn it faithfully and well, and she had taken it off when what was underneath it was the only thing that would serve. She went to the linen room and finished the inventory and put everything in order. She went downstairs. Lily had moved from the floor to the sofa and was sitting with her feet tucked under her and her sketchbook on her knees and her tongue at the corner of her mouth in the expression of absolute concentration she wore when something in the drawing required more from her than the ordinary. Adrian was at the other end of the sofa, reading, and his hand was resting on the sofa cushion, and Lily's feet were approximately 6 inches from it, and neither of them had apparently registered this proximity, or they had registered it and simply accepted it as part of the ordinary geography of sitting in the same room. Beatrice sat in the chair by the window. The winter light was going. The room was warm. The lamp made its small amber circle, and the city outside was doing what Chicago does in February, pressing its cold against every surface. And inside the estate, the fire in the grate was making the room smell of wood smoke and the kind of permanent things. Lily looked up from her drawing. "Beatrice," she said. "Yes." "Do you think Marcus could be friends with a horse who is not as impressive as him?" Beatrice considered this with the gravity it deserved. "I think Marcus would benefit from knowing a horse who didn't expect him to be impressive all the time." Lily looked at the drawing, looked back at Beatrice. Something in her face decided. "I'm going to draw that horse too," she said. "I think that's a good idea." Lily bent back over the sketchbook. Adrian lowered his book slightly and looked across at Beatrice, with the expression she had finally correctly identified and now saw clearly every time it arrived. She held it without looking away. Outside, Chicago moved through its winter with the particular indifference of a city that has seen everything and annotated none of it. The cars on Caldwell Drive passed without slowing. The fountain in the courtyard ran its cold water in the dark. The limestone of the estate held its temperature the way stone holds everything, permanently, without apology, in every direction at once. Inside, a woman who had once made herself invisible sat in the light of a room that had chosen her and let herself be seen, and did not look away, and the night came down gently over the house, and the house held.